Imagine this. A small-town waitress, juggling her own struggles, chooses kindness over convenience one snowy evening. She gives a warm meal to a freezing, hungry boy who has nowhere else to go. What she doesn't know is that this single act of compassion will ignite a chain of events that changes her life forever. From mysterious strangers watching her every move to powerful corporations threatening everything she stands for, her journey becomes a battle between greed and integrity, between fear and resilience. How far would you go to protect what's right? This is the story of Mia, a story about the power of kindness, the strength of community, and the courage it takes to fight for what matters. Before we dive into this extraordinary journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll never miss more inspiring stories like this, stories that challenge the heart and stir the soul. Now let's begin the story of how one woman's small act of kindness became the spark that changed everything. Waitress had no idea who was watching. A billionaire showed her the power of kindness. The icy wind howled through the narrow streets of Greenfield, a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwest. It was the kind of winter that gnawed at the bones, leaving frost on the diner's old windows and a chill that seemed to seep into the walls. Inside Benny's diner, the air was warmer, but far from welcoming. Mia, a waitress in her late 20s, moved swiftly between tables, balancing steaming plates and lukewarm smiles. Her uniform, once crisp and white, now bore the wear and tear of long hours. She was used to the bustle, to the indifferent glances of the regulars who barely noticed her unless their coffee cup was empty. The bell above the door jingled, its sound lost amidst the clatter of utensils and the hum of idle chatter. Mia turned briefly, expecting another customer bundled up against the cold, but her breath caught when she saw him. A boy, no older than 10, standing just inside the doorway. His coat was threadbare, far too light for the biting cold outside, and his cheeks were flushed red from the wind. He lingered near the door, his small hands trembling as he clutched the hem of his jacket. His wide brown eyes scanned the room nervously, darting away whenever they met anyone's gaze. Before Mia could approach him, a gruff voice rang out from one of the booths near the counter. "Hey, kid, shut the door. You're letting all the heat out." The boy flinched and quickly pushed the door closed, his small frame shrinking further. A few heads turned, some with mild curiosity, but most with irritation. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him, her heart tightening. She crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "Hey there," she said softly. "Are you okay?" The boy hesitated, his lips trembling as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, he nodded. I'm just cold," he murmured. Mia's heart ached at the sight of him. "Come on in," she said, her voice gentle. "It's warm here. Have you eaten anything today?" He shook his head, his gaze dropping to the floor. Mia stood and guided him to a corner booth, away from the prying eyes of the other customers. "Wait here," she said with a smile. "I'll bring you something to eat." As Mia walked back toward the kitchen, she noticed the whispers start. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband, her voice low but loud enough to carry. "She's just asking for trouble. First it's one kid, then it's a dozen. You start giving. Handouts and they'll never leave." Mia ignored them, though her jaw tightened. In the kitchen, she grabbed a bowl of chicken soup and a thick slice of bread, her movements quick but deliberate. When she returned, the boy was sitting stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. His eyes widened when she placed the steaming bowl in front of him. "It's on the house," Mia said softly. The boy looked up, his face a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Mia pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "What's your name?" "Jake," he said after a moment. "Well, Jake," Mia replied with a smile, "take your time. Eat as much as you..." want. As Jake began to eat, Mia's mind drifted to her younger brother, Ben. She could still see his face, pale and thin, just like Jake's, in the months before he passed. The memory hit her like a wave, a sharp reminder of the promise she had made to herself after losing him. I'll never turn my back on anyone who needs help, not if I can do something about it. From across the room, a man in a sharp suit watched the interaction unfold. He was seated at the farthest booth, his back straight, his expression unreadable. Unlike the other patrons, he didn't seem irritated or dismissive. Instead, his eyes were fixed on Mia and Jake, observing every detail. With quiet intensity, Jake finished his soup and looked up at Mia, his expression both shy and grateful. "Do you have a place to stay?" Mia asked carefully. Jake shook his head. "I sleep wherever I can. Sometimes the shelter, but it's full most nights." Mia's chest tightened. She wanted to do more for him, but her options were limited. She barely made enough to keep her own head above water. Still, she couldn't let him leave empty-handed. "Wait here," she said, standing quickly. She packed a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water into a paper bag and handed it to Jake when she returned. "Here," she said, her voice soft, "for later." Jake stared at the bag for a moment. He then looked up at her, his eyes shining. "Thank you," he said again. As Jake stood to leave, the man in the sharp suit rose from his seat. He approached the counter, pulling out a crisp $100 bill and placing it on the counter. "For the boy," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. Mia looked at him, startled. "Why?" she began, but the man held up a hand, silencing her. "Kindness," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "as a way of coming back to you." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind an air of mystery that hung in the diner long after the door closed behind him. Mia found herself standing at the counter, staring at the bill and the man's retreating figure. When she returned to the booth where he had been sitting, she found a note scrawled on a napkin. "This is just the beginning." She held the note tightly, her mind racing. She didn't know what it meant, but deep down she felt a shift, like the course of her life had just been altered in ways she couldn't yet understand. That night, as Mia lay awake, her thoughts returned to the man's words and the boy's fragile smile. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was on the horizon, something she wasn't prepared for but couldn't ignore. The snow fell in soft, relentless flakes outside the small window of Mia's apartment, dimly lit by the warm glow of a single lamp. She sat curled up on her threadbare couch, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea that had long gone cold. The warmth of the diner had faded, leaving only the gnawing chill of her thoughts. The events of the day refused to leave her mind. Jake's wide, fearful eyes, his trembling hands clutching that paper bag as he disappeared into the snowy night. And then there was the man, the stranger who had left behind $100 bill and a cryptic note. "Kindness has a way of coming back to you." His words lingered in her head, their meaning elusive but oddly familiar. Mia leaned back, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. It wasn't the first time she had encountered a child like Jake, but there was something different about him. The way he carried himself, quiet yet wary, reminded her of someone she hadn't thought about in years, her brother Ben. Mia's chest tightened as memories she had buried for so long began to surface. Ben had been just 12 years old when he got sick, a boy full of life, with an infectious laugh and dreams far too big for their small, struggling family. He had wanted to become a pilot, obsessed with the planes that roared above their neighborhood as they approached the nearby airport. Mia could still see him, his face pressed against the glass of their bedroom window, sketching planes on scrap paper with a pencil that was always too short. But their world had unraveled when Ben fell ill. The fever had come first, then the weight, loss, and finally the diagnosis, a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. Mia had been only 19 at the time, barely scraping by on her own as a waitress, while their single mother worked double shifts as a janitor to make ends meet. The medical bills piled up faster than they could comprehend, drowning them in a debt they couldn't escape. Mia remembered sitting in hospital waiting rooms, holding Ben's frail hand as he looked at her with those same wide, brown eyes. "I'll get better, right?" he had asked one night, his voice soft but certain. Mia had nodded, her throat too tight to speak. But deep down, she had known the truth. They didn't have the money to give him a real chance. The community around them had offered little support. People sympathized, of course, but sympathy didn't pay for treatment. And when it came to charity, everyone had their own problems. Her mother had written letters to organizations, churches, and anyone who might help, but the responses were always the same: polite refusals, well wishes, and empty words. When Ben passed away 6 months later, Mia's world shattered. She had promised him, during those long, sleepless nights at the hospital, that she would take care of him, that she wouldn't let him suffer. And yet, she had failed. The guilt had stayed with her, growing like a shadow that refused to fade. Even now, a decade later, she could still hear his voice, quiet and weak, asking her for something she hadn't been able to give. Mia set her mug down on the coffee table, her fingers trembling. Jake's face overlapped with Ben's in her mind, the resemblance too striking to ignore. The same vulnerability, the same quiet hope hidden beneath a layer of exhaustion and fear. She couldn't help but wonder, where was Jake now? Had he found a warm place to sleep? Was he safe? Her thoughts shifted to the stranger at the diner. There had been something about him, his calm demeanor, the way he spoke as if he knew more than he let on. Mia replayed his words in her mind. Kindness has a way of coming back to you. They had felt personal, almost as if he was speaking directly to her past. And then there was the note he left behind. This is just the beginning. Mia stood and began pacing her small living room. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. His gesture had been generous, but the way he watched her, the way he seemed to understand something about her, left her unsettled. Had he recognized her? Was it possible he knew her family? The idea seemed far-fetched, but there was a strange familiarity in his words that she couldn't ignore. She stopped at the small shelf by the window, her eyes falling on an old photo frame. It held a picture of her and Ben, taken just a few months before he fell ill. He was grinning, his arm slung around her shoulders, holding up one of his airplane sketches with pride. Mia picked up the frame, running her thumb over the glass. "If I get better," Ben had once said, "I want to help other kids who don't have anyone, like me." His words had stayed with her all these years, shaping the way she saw the world. She had tried to honor that promise in small ways, giving a sandwich to a homeless man here, slipping $1 into a child's hand there. But now, faced with Jake, she wondered if she could do more, if she should do more. Her thoughts drifted back to the stranger. His presence felt like a spark, igniting something dormant within her. Was it coincidence that he had appeared on the same day Jake walked into the diner? Or was there a reason behind it? Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something larger, something she hadn't yet begun to understand. That night, as she lay in bed, sleep eluded her. The faces of Ben and Jake swirled in her mind, merging into one. The snow continued to fall outside, its quiet descent a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts raging within her. She stared at the ceiling, her hand clutching the photo frame she had brought to bed. "If you're out there, Jake," she whispered, "I hope you're safe. And if I can help you, I will. I promise." As she closed her eyes, the image of the man's note lingered in her mind, its message both a comfort and a challenge. This is just the beginning. The next day, as Mia prepared for another shift, At the diner, she noticed something unusual, a folded piece of paper tucked under her apartment door. When she opened it, her breath caught. The words were simple, but chilling. "We need to talk. Meet me at the diner tonight." The sun rose, reluctantly over Greenfield, its faint light battling the grey clouds that seemed intent on holding the town in a perpetual winter chill. Mia sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the folded piece of paper she'd found under her apartment door the night before. The words were scrawled in neat, deliberate handwriting. "We need to talk. Meet me at the diner tonight." She had reread it at least a dozen times, searching for clues in the simplicity of the message. Who had left it? Was it the man from the diner, the one who had paid for Jake's meal and left the cryptic note? The thought sent a ripple of unease through her. What did he want? And why her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the whistle of her kettle. She rose to pour herself a cup of tea, her movements mechanical, as her mind churned with questions. As much as the note unsettled her, it also sparked something else, curiosity. The man's words, his calm demeanor, the way he had seemed to see through her, all lingered like an unfinished melody in her mind. Mia shook her head, forcing herself to focus. She had a shift to get through, and the diner was the last place she wanted to be today, but there was no avoiding it. She grabbed her coat, tucking the note into her pocket as she headed out. The diner was already bustling when Mia arrived. The usual crowd filled the booths and counter stools, their voices mingling with the hum of the coffee machine and the clatter of dishes. Mia tied on her apron and tried to settle into her routine, but the weight of the note pressed against her pocket, a constant reminder of the night ahead. As she refilled a coffee cup, a familiar voice broke through the din. "I heard about that boy from yesterday." A woman at the counter whispered loudly to her companion. "What's her name?" "Mia. She fed him for free. Can you believe that? These kids just take advantage." Mia's grip on the coffee pot tightened, but she forced herself to keep moving. This wasn't the first time she had been the subject of idle gossip, and she doubted it would be the last. Still, the words stung. Why was it so hard for people to understand the value of a simple act of kindness? The day dragged on, every small interaction weighed down by the growing tension in her chest. By mid-afternoon, Mia noticed something strange. A car she didn't recognize parked across the street. It was a sleek black sedan, the kind that looked out of place in Greenfield. She tried to ignore it, but every time she glanced out the window, it was still there. As the evening approached, the diner began to quiet. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, though she told herself it was probably just her nerves. She had nearly convinced herself to ignore the note entirely when the bell above the door jingled and he walked in. The man from yesterday, the stranger in the sharp suit. He moved with quiet confidence, his grey hair neatly combed, his piercing eyes scanning the room before settling on her. He gave a small nod, and Mia felt her heart skip a beat. "Miss Mia," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "May I have a word?" Mia swallowed hard, but nodded. She motioned to an empty booth in the corner, away from the other patrons. He followed her, his movements deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. "Thank you for meeting me," he began as they sat down. His voice was smooth, measured, and oddly familiar, though Mia couldn't place why. "I didn't have much of a choice," Mia replied, her tone wary. "You left a note under my door." "I did," he said with a faint smile. "I thought it would be the most effective way to get your attention." Mia folded her arms, her gaze steady. "Who are you, and why are you so interested in me?" The man leaned back slightly, his eyes studying her, as if weighing how much to reveal. "My name is Richard Harris. I'm a businessman, and I believe in rewarding kindness when I see it." Mia frowned. "Kindness?" Richard nodded. "What you did for that boy yesterday, Jake, was remarkable, Most people would have ignored him or worse, turned him away. But you didn't. It was just a meal, Mia said quietly. To you, perhaps, Richard said, but to him it was much more. And to someone like me, it was a reminder. A reminder of what? Richard hesitated, his gaze drifting for a moment, as if caught in a memory. A reminder of where I came from. You see, Miss Mia, I wasn't always a businessman. I grew up in a place not unlike Greenfield. Poor, forgotten, and if not for a few kind souls, I wouldn't be where I am today. Mia's skepticism softened slightly, but questions still swirled in her mind. Why tell me this? What does it have to do with me? Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. Because people like you are rare. You have the ability to see others, truly see them, in a way most people can't, and I believe that ability deserves recognition, and perhaps a little help. Mia blinked, taken aback. Help? What kind of help? Richard smiled faintly, but didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table between them. This is for you, he said. Consider it the beginning of something bigger. Mia stared at the envelope, her fingers twitching with the urge to open it. But when she looked up to question him further, Richard was already standing. Wait, she said, rising to her feet. Why me? Why now? Richard paused, his hand resting on the back of the booth. Because timing is everything, Miss Mia, and there's more to this than you realize. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Mia alone with her thoughts. And the mysterious envelope. She sat back down, her hands trembling as she picked it up. When she finally opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a check for an amount that made her heart race, accompanied by a single line written on crisp stationery. Use this wisely. We'll speak again soon. Mia stared at the check, a mix of disbelief and apprehension churning in her. Just who was this man, really, and what did he expect in return? As questions mounted, Mia realized her quiet life was about to change forever. Mia sat at the diner's corner booth long after Richard Harris had left. The envelope still rested in her hands, its weight far heavier than its size. She stared at the check inside, the number written on it, an amount she had never seen in her life, let alone imagined holding. Her heart pounded as questions raced through her mind. Why me? What does he expect in return? As the diner's lights dimmed for closing, Benny, the diner's gruff but kind-hearted owner, approached her. Mia, you okay? He asked, wiping his hands on a towel. You've been sitting there for an hour. Mia hesitated, unsure whether to share the bizarre encounter. Yeah, I'm fine, Benny. Just a lot on my mind. He gave her a curious look but didn't press further. Well, don't let it keep you up too late. You've got another shift. Tomorrow, Mia forced a small smile. Thanks, Benny. Back in her apartment, the reality of the situation began to sink in. She placed the check on her kitchen table, staring at the pristine piece of paper as if it might reveal the answers she needed. The accompanying note, "Use this wisely. We'll speak again soon," felt more like a riddle than an explanation. She picked up the check again, her hands trembling slightly. The amount was enough to pay off her debts, fix her car, and even put some money aside for emergencies. It was a lifeline, something she had prayed for during countless sleepless nights, but the thought of accepting it unsettled her. What would Richard Harris want in return? Her mind drifted back to their conversation at the diner. His words had been kind, even sincere, but there had been an underlying intensity in his gaze, as though he knew more about her than he should. And then there was the lingering feeling that their meeting wasn't random. Mia sighed, leaning back in her chair. She thought about Jake, where he might be now, whether he was safe, whether he had anyone looking out for him. The memory of his wide, uncertain eyes tugged at her heart. She couldn't ignore the connection she felt to him, a connection that reminded her too much of Ben. The next morning, Mia woke with a sense of unease. She had tucked the check away in a drawer, deciding to avoid thinking about it for at least one day. But as she walked to the diner for her shift, the events of the previous night followed her like a shadow. The day unfolded much like the one before, with regular customers filling the booths and familiar faces exchanging small talk. Yet Mia felt distant, distracted by the weight of her secret. It wasn't long before the whispers started again. A pair of women seated at the counter were clearly talking about her. "She's probably in trouble," one of them said, glancing sideways at Mia. "You don't just get a stranger handing you money like that without a catch." Mia clenched her jaw, keeping her focus on the coffee pot in her hand. The gossip irritated her, but deep down she couldn't help but wonder if they were right. As the afternoon wore on, a sleek black car pulled up outside the diner. Mia froze, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized it. It was the same car that had been parked near the diner the day before. The door opened, and Richard Harris stepped out, his movements calm and deliberate. He entered the diner, his presence commanding the attention of everyone inside. The whispers stopped as heads turned, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Richard's eyes met Mia's, and he gave her a small, polite nod before taking a seat at the same booth they had occupied the night before. Mia hesitated. Before approaching him, her emotions a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "You're back," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "I said we'd speak again," Richard replied smoothly. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" Mia glanced around the diner. The curious stares of the patrons made her uncomfortable, but she nodded and slid into the booth across from him. "I assume you've looked at the check," Richard began, his tone even. "I did," Mia admitted, "and I still don't understand why you gave it to me." Richard folded his hands on the table. "Because I believe in rewarding people who make a difference. What you did for that boy, Jake, was more than just a kind gesture. It showed me something rare, the ability to act selflessly, even when you have so little yourself." Mia frowned, her skepticism returning. "And you just decided to give me thousands of dollars because of that? There has to be more to this." Richard's expression softened. "There is. I want to help you, Mia, but not just with money. I want to give you the opportunity to make a real impact." "What kind of impact?" Mia asked warily. Richard leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "Have you ever thought about how many children like Jake are out there? Lost, hungry, invisible to the world? What if you could do more than just feed one of them? What if you could create a place where they all feel seen, cared for, and safe?" Mia stared at him, her mind racing. "You're talking about what? A shelter? A program?" Richard smiled faintly. "Something like that. And I want you to be the one to lead it." Mia blinked, taken aback. "Why me?" "Because you understand what it's like to be overlooked. You've lived it. And because I see potential in you, Mia, the kind of potential that can change lives." The room seemed to fade as Mia absorbed his words. Part of her was drawn to the idea, to the possibility of making a difference on a scale she had never imagined. But another part of her was wary. Could she trust him? And even if she could, was she capable of taking on something so big? Richard reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a business card. "Think about it," he said. "Take as much time as you need, but know this: the opportunity won't wait forever." He stood, giving her one last look. "I'll be in touch." As he walked out, the whispers in the diner resumed, louder this time. Mia sat in silence, the card in her hand and a million thoughts in her head. That night, as Mia lay awake, the enormity of what Richard had proposed began to sink in. But just as she started to feel a flicker of hope, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've attracted attention. Be careful who you trust." The streetlights outside Mia's apartment cast long shadows across her living The room, as she sat on the edge of her couch, staring at her phone. The text message glowed on the screen, its words sharp and cryptic. "You've attracted attention. Be careful who you trust." Her pulse quickened as she read it again. The sender was unknown, the message brief, but it carried an unmistakable warning. She glanced toward the drawer where Richard Harris's check was tucked away. Could the message have something to do with him? Or was it about Jake? The questions swirled in her mind, making sleep impossible. She paced the small space, replaying every interaction with Richard in her head. He had been polite, generous even, but there was a weight behind his words, an intensity that unsettled her. And now this text had introduced a new layer of uncertainty. Next morning, Mia arrived at the diner earlier than usual, hoping to lose herself in the familiarity of work. But as she tied on her apron and stepped behind the counter, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her suspicion grew when she noticed the same black sedan parked down the street, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. She tried to ignore it, but every time she glanced out the window, it was still there, a silent reminder of the unknown forces circling her life. By midday, the whispers among the diner's regulars had grown louder. Mia caught snippets of their conversations. Speculations about the man in the suit who had visited her, about the boy she had helped, and about why someone like her seemed to attract so much attention. "She's hiding something," one woman murmured to her friend. "I heard he left her a big tip," another added, her tone heavy with envy. Mia clenched her jaw, her hands tightening around the coffee pot she was holding. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, but she knew it would only fuel their gossip. Instead, she focused on her tasks, forcing herself to appear calm, even as her thoughts raced. That evening, after her shift, Mia found herself staring at Richard's business card. The sleek black lettering spelled out his name, a phone number, and a single line beneath it. Harris Foundation, Building Futures. She hesitated before dialing the number. Her thumb hovered over the screen, her mind filled with doubts. Was this the right thing to do? Could she trust him? But then she thought about Jake, about the chance to make a difference, and she pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Harris Foundation, this is Mr. Harris." Mia's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to answer directly. "Mr. Harris, it's Mia from the diner," she said, her voice hesitant. "Ah, Miss Mia," Richard said warmly. "I was hoping to hear from you. Have you given my proposal any thought?" "I have," Mia replied, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "But I need to know more. Why me? Why now? And what exactly are you asking me to do?" There was a brief pause before Richard answered. "I understand your hesitation. This isn't a small decision. Why don't we meet tomorrow? I'll explain. Everything in detail." "Where?" Mia asked. "I'll send a car for you," Richard said. "It will take you to my office, let's say noon?" Mia hesitated, but something in his tone reassured her. "All right," she said. Noon. The next day, the black sedan arrived promptly at 11:45 a.m., its sleek form gliding to a stop outside her apartment. Mia climbed into the back seat, her nerves taut, as the driver silently navigated through Greenfield's quiet streets. When they arrived at Richard's office, Mia was taken aback by its grandeur. The building was a sleek glass structure, its lobby adorned with modern art and marble floors. She followed the receptionist's instructions to the top floor, where Richard greeted her with his usual calm demeanor. "Miss Mia," he said, extending a hand, "thank you for coming." Mia shook his hand, her grip firm despite her nerves. "I need answers," she said without preamble. Richard gestured to a seating area by the window, where a panoramic view of the city stretched out before them. "Of course," he said, his tone steady. "Let's begin." Richard explained his vision, a network of community centers designed to support vulnerable children, providing meals, education, and shelter. He wanted Mia to oversee the first center, using her empathy and experience to shape its culture. "You've seen what it's like to be overlooked," Richard said. "You understand the importance of being seen, being cared for. That's what these children need, someone who truly sees them." Mia listened, her skepticism slowly giving way to a flicker of hope. The idea was ambitious, almost overwhelming, but it resonated with her. She thought of Jake, of Ben, and of all the children who had slipped through the cracks because no one cared enough to catch them. "What's the catch?" Mia asked finally, her gaze steady. Richard's expression softened. "There is no catch, Miss Mia, but there is responsibility. This won't be easy. You'll face criticism, setbacks, and challenges you can't yet imagine, but I believe you're capable of rising to the occasion." Mia sat back, her mind racing. The opportunity was bigger than anything she had ever dreamed of, but it also terrified her. Could she really take on something so monumental? As the meeting ended, Richard handed her a folder filled with details about the project. "Take your time," he said. "Read through this and call me when you're ready to commit. Just remember, this is about more than you or me. It's about the children we can help." Mia nodded, clutching the folder tightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. As she left the building, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She wanted to believe in Richard's intentions, but the mysterious text from the night before lingered in her mind, a shadow she couldn't ignore. When she arrived home, she found another note slipped under her door. This one was even more unsettling. "They're watching you. Don't trust him." Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. The stakes were higher than she had realized, and now she didn't know who to trust. But one thing was certain, her life was no longer her own. Mia sat at her kitchen table, staring at the note in her trembling hands. The bold, hastily scrawled words, "They're watching you, don't trust him," burned into her mind. The shadows outside her window seemed darker, the stillness of her apartment heavier. She glanced toward the folder Richard Harris had given her earlier, its clean lines and professional logo, a stark contrast to the chaos now swirling in her life. Who was watching her? And why? Her first instinct was to call Richard, to confront him with the note and demand answers. But a flicker of doubt held her back. What if the warning was true? She didn't know him well enough to dismiss the possibility, no matter how genuine he seemed. The next morning, Mia dragged herself to the diner, exhaustion weighing on her like a lead blanket. The whispers that had plagued her over the last few days seemed louder, sharper. She felt the eyes of the regulars following her every move, their judgment palpable. By midday, Benny pulled her aside, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mia," he said, his voice low, "what's going on with you lately? You've been distracted and people are talking." Mia hesitated, her fingers tightening around her apron. "It's nothing, Benny. Just some personal stuff." Benny gave her a long look but nodded. "All right. But you know, if you need help, you can talk to me." "Thanks," Mia said, managing a faint smile. "I'll be fine." That evening, Mia returned to her apartment and locked the door behind her, double-checking the locks before pulling the curtains closed. She sat on the couch, the folder from Richard still unopened in front of her. The questions gnawed at her. Who had sent the note? Was it a baseless warning, or was she stepping into something far bigger than she could handle? Finally, with a deep breath, she opened the folder. Inside were detailed plans for the community center Richard wanted her to lead. Diagrams, budgets, projected timelines. It was all laid out with precision, a testament to his resources and commitment. But something caught her eye, a list of donors. Among the names was one she recognized immediately, Hargrave Industries. Mia froze. Hargrave Industries was infamous in Greenfield, a company tied to corruption and underhanded dealings. Its CEO, Victor Hargrave, was known for exploiting vulnerable communities. Yet here it was, listed as one of Richard's major partners. Her stomach turned. Was this the catch she'd been waiting for? The next day, Mia decided to confront Richard. She couldn't move forward without answers. When she called his office, she was surprised to be connected to him directly. "Miss Mia," Richard said warmly, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Are you ready to move forward?" "Not yet," Mia replied, her voice steady. "But I need to talk to you. Today." Richard's tone shifted slightly, but he agreed without hesitation. "Of course, meet me at my office this afternoon." As Mia approached Richard's building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of a figure in a dark coat, slipping behind a parked car. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to keep moving. When she arrived at Richard's office, he greeted her with his usual calm demeanor. But this time, Mia didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Who is Victor Hargrave?" she asked, her voice sharp. Richard's brow furrowed slightly. "A business associate?" he said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because his name is all over your plans," Mia replied, holding up the donor list. "And he's known for exploiting people like the ones you claim to want to help. So tell me, Richard, how can I trust you if you're working with someone like him?" Richard sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Miss Mia, I understand your concerns. Hargrave Industries has a complicated reputation, but their financial resources are undeniable. The truth is, sometimes achieving a greater good requires working with imperfect partners." Mia's stomach churned. "That's not good enough," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You talk about helping people, but how can you expect me to trust you if you're willing to compromise your values?" Richard's expression hardened slightly. "And what would you suggest, Mia? That I reject millions of dollars in funding because you don't like where it comes from? Do you know how many children we can help with that money?" "That doesn't justify working with someone like Hargrave," Mia shot back. "There has to be another way." Richard studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "There's always another way. But it's not always the easy way. Are you prepared for that, Miss Mia? Because if you want to take a stand, it will come with consequences." Mia's resolve wavered, but she held her ground. "I am," she said firmly. Richard's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. Then, let's find another way." As Mia left his office, her mind was spinning. Richard's willingness to reconsider gave her a glimmer of hope, but the encounter left her with more questions than answers. She walked quickly, the feeling of being watched still lingering. When she turned onto her street, she saw the same figure in the dark coat standing near her building. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Hey!" she called out, her voice strong despite the fear clawing at her chest. The figure turned and began to walk away, but not before Mia caught a glimpse of their face, a young woman, her expression guarded but not hostile. Mia froze, unsure of what to do, as the woman disappeared into the shadows. Back in her apartment, Mia found yet another note slipped under her door. "You're asking the right questions. Be careful who you trust." Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. She was caught between Richard's vision and the shadowy warnings of a stranger. As the stakes grew higher, she realized she was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the truth. The third note slipped under Mia's door had changed everything. "You're asking the right questions. Be careful who you trust." She sat in her living room, the note clenched in her hand, her thoughts racing. The warnings, the mysterious woman following her, and Richard's connection to Hargrave Industries. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. The shadows outside her apartment seemed darker than usual, and every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Mia had always considered herself strong, resilient, but this was different. She wasn't just navigating her own life anymore. She was being pulled into something far bigger than she had imagined. The sea. Next morning, Mia returned to work at the diner, determined to keep her focus. The whispers among the regulars had faded, replaced by the usual chatter about politics and weather. But even the familiarity of the diner couldn't ease the tension gripping her. Midway through her shift, the door jingled, and Mia's heart skipped a beat. The woman in the dark coat from the night before stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Mia. Mia froze, the coffee pot in her hand trembling slightly. The woman walked to a booth near the back, her movements deliberate. Without thinking, Mia followed her, setting the pot down on the table as she leaned in. "You've been following me," Mia said, her voice low but steady. The woman looked up, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "I had to make sure you were ready," she replied simply. "Ready for what?" Mia asked. The woman motioned for her to sit. Reluctantly, Mia slid into the booth across from her. "My name's Evelyn," the woman said, her tone measured. "And I'm here to warn you. Richard Harris isn't who you think he is." Mia's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He talks a good game about helping people. But his partnerships with companies like Hargrave Industries aren't just about funding. They're about control. Hargrave doesn't give money without expecting something in return, and neither does Richard." Mia frowned, her mind racing. "He told me he was willing to find another way." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "And maybe he is. But you need to ask yourself why someone like Richard Harris, with all his resources, needs you for this project. What does he gain from it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. That evening, Mia sat in her apartment, the folder from Richard spread out on the coffee table. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind, intertwining with her own doubts. As she read through the documents again, she noticed small details she hadn't caught before. Vague language in the contracts, clauses that seemed to favor the donors more than the children the project was meant to help. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. "It was Richard, Miss Mia," he said when she answered, his voice calm as ever. "I wanted to check in. Have you had a chance to review the plans?" "I have," Mia replied cautiously. "And what are your thoughts?" Mia hesitated. "There are some things I don't understand. The contracts, the donors, why are there so many clauses that seem to protect them instead of the people we're trying to help?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "You're thorough," Richard said finally, a hint of approval in his tone. "I respect that. These contracts are standard for large-scale projects, Miss Mia. They're designed to ensure the sustainability of the program." "But at what cost?" Mia pressed. "What if those clauses give the donors too much power?" Richard sighed. "It's a delicate balance, Mia. These donors are the ones making this possible. Without their support, we have nothing. And Hargrave Industries," Mia asked, her voice sharper now, "do they fit into that balance too?" Another pause, longer this time. "I told you, Miss Mia, Hargrave's reputation is complicated, but their contributions are significant. This is how the world works. You can't always avoid getting your hands dirty." The words sent a chill down Mia's spine. "I'm not sure I can accept that," she said quietly. "I understand," Richard replied, his tone cool. "But think carefully, Miss Mia. Walking away from this won't just affect you. It will affect every child we could have helped." He hung up before she could respond. The following day, Mia met Evelyn again, this time in a small cafe far from the diner. She brought the folder with her, determined to understand what she was dealing with. Evelyn flipped through the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "This isn't about helping kids," she said finally. "This is about power. These contracts give the donors control over the operations, the resources, even the message. If you go through with this, Mia, you'll just be a figurehead while they pull the strings." Mia's heart sank. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed felt like a blow. "So what do I do?" she asked. Evelyn hesitated. "You find another way. Start small. Use the money he gave you to create something independent. Something they can't touch." Mia shook her head. "That's not enough. I can't do this alone." "You won't be alone," Evelyn said firmly. "There are people out there who want to help for the right reasons. You just have to find them." As Mia walked home that evening, her mind was a whirlwind of doubt and determination. She didn't know who to trust, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't ignore the opportunity to make a difference. When she reached her apartment, another note was waiting for her, this time pinned to her door. It read, "You're closer than you think. Keep pushing." Mia stared at the note, its message both encouraging and cryptic. She was closer to the truth, but the question remained. Would she find it in time? And what price would she have to pay? The note pinned to Mia's door stopped her in her tracks. "You're closer than you think. Keep pushing." Her hands trembled as she tore it down, scanning the empty hallway for any sign of the person who had left it. The air felt heavier, charged with a tension she couldn't explain. She closed the door behind her, locking it securely, before sitting at her small kitchen table. The words repeated in her mind like a riddle. Closer than I think. To what? The truth? A solution? Mia's thoughts turned to Evelyn's warning, the troubling clauses in Richard's contracts, and the shadowy presence of Hargrave Industries. Every detail seemed to point to the same conclusion. This wasn't just about helping kids. It was about power, control, and money. The next morning, Mia woke with a renewed sense of purpose. If she was closer to the truth, she needed to find it. She spent hours poring over the documents Richard had given her, searching for anything she might have missed. It was in the donor agreement section that she found it, a clause buried in legal jargon that granted Hargrave Industries veto power over major decisions. The implications were staggering. If this project moved forward, Hargrave could manipulate it to serve their own interests, undermining everything Mia thought she was building. Her chest tightened. Richard had been honest in his own way, but he had also downplayed the extent of Hargrave's control. Evelyn was right. This wasn't just about the children. Mia met Evelyn again that afternoon, this time at a quiet park away from prying eyes. She showed her the clause, her voice shaking with frustration. "This proves it," Mia said. "They'll use this project to serve themselves, not the kids." Evelyn nodded grimly. "This is how they operate. They present a facade of charity, while consolidating power behind the scenes, and once you're in, it's almost impossible to get out." Mia leaned back on the park bench, her thoughts swirling. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "If I walk away, I lose any chance of making a difference. But if I stay, I become part of their system." Evelyn placed a hand on Mia's arm, her gaze steady. "You don't have to play by their rules. Use the money Richard gave you to start your own program. Keep it small, keep it local, and keep it yours. You don't need their permission to help people." Mia spent the next few days grappling with the weight of her decision. She avoided Richard's calls, knowing that she couldn't face him until she was certain of her path. The pressure mounted as the whispers at the diner grew louder, the regulars speculating about her connection to the powerful man in the suit. On the third day, a new development shook her resolve. As she walked home from work, a man in a dark suit approached her on the street. His demeanor was calm, but there was an edge to his presence that set her on edge. "Miss Mia," he said, his voice smooth, "I work for Hargrave Industries. Mr. Hargrave would like to meet with you." Mia's breath caught. "Why?" The man smiled faintly. "He believes you have potential. He'd like to discuss how we might work together." "I'm not interested," Mia said, her voice firm. The man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "I think you'll find it's in your best interest to hear him out. Opportunities like this don't come often." Mia stepped back, her heart pounding. "Tell Mr. Hargrave I'll pass." She turned and walked away, her pulse racing as she felt the man's gaze following her. That night, Mia called Evelyn, her voice shaking as she recounted the encounter. "They're trying to intimidate me," she said. "They want me to fall." "In line," Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. "That's how they operate. But you're stronger than they think, Mia. You've already come this far. Don't let them scare you off." Mia's resolve hardened. She wouldn't let Hargrave or anyone else dictate her choices. If she was going to help children like Jake, she would do it on her own terms. The next day, Mia made her decision. She withdrew the money Richard had given her, careful to document every step. She began reaching out to local organizations, churches, and individuals she trusted, sharing her vision for a small community program. The response was overwhelming. People donated supplies, offered their time, and shared ideas for how to make the program a reality. Mia felt a spark of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Richard called her that evening, his tone cool but curious. "Miss Mia," he said, "I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right?" "I've made my decision," Mia replied, her voice steady. "I'm starting my own program, small, local, independent, and I won't be working with Hargrave Industries." There was a long pause on the other end. When Richard spoke again, his voice was quiet but sharp. "That's a bold move, Mia, but it won't be easy. You'll face challenges you can't imagine." "I know," Mia said, "but I'd rather face them on my own terms than compromise my values." Richard sighed. "Very well. If that's your choice, I won't stand in your way. But remember this, Mia. The world doesn't reward idealism, it rewards results." The call ended, leaving Mia with a mix of relief and unease. That night, as she prepared for bed, she found yet another note slipped under her door. "Well done. You've taken the first step. Stay strong." Mia held the note tightly, her determination solidifying. She didn't know who was behind the notes or what lay ahead, but she was ready to fight for the future she believed in. As Mia's program began to take shape, new challenges emerged. Resources were stretched thin, opposition grew louder, and the shadow of Hargrave Industries loomed larger than ever. But the biggest test was yet to come. The first day of Mia's independent program dawned cold and quiet, the morning frost glittering. On the streets of Greenfield, the small community center she had managed to secure, a modest building donated by a local church, was far from perfect. The floors creaked, the walls needed a fresh coat of paint, and the heating system groaned with age. But to Mia, it was a beginning. Volunteers bustled around her, organizing supplies and preparing for the children who would arrive that afternoon. Word of her program had spread quickly, bringing in donations and offers of help from people Mia had never met. It gave her a sense of hope, even as the shadow of Hargrave Industries loomed in the back of her mind. By noon, the first wave of children arrived, some with their parents, others on their own. Among them was Jake, his small frame bundled in a coat that looked slightly newer than the one he'd worn at the diner. His eyes lit up when he saw Mia. "Mia!" he called, running to her. She crouched to meet him, smiling despite the lump in her throat. "Hey, Jake, you made it." He nodded enthusiastically. "This place is cool. Is it yours?" Mia hesitated, glancing around at the patched-up walls and mismatched furniture. "It's ours," she said finally. "For kids like you." Jake's smile widened, and Mia felt a surge of pride. This was why she had taken the risk. As the day went on, Mia's confidence grew. The children laughed and played, their voices filling the space with a warmth that chased away her doubts. Volunteers served meals, organized games, and helped with homework. For a moment, Mia allowed herself to believe that everything might actually work out. But that evening, as the last of the children left and the volunteers began cleaning up, Her phone buzzed with a message. The sender was unknown, but the words were chillingly clear. "This isn't over. Walk away while you still can." Mia's chest tightened. She stepped outside, scanning the darkened street for any sign of movement. The shadows seemed to shift, but there was no one there. She clenched her fists, anger rising to replace her fear. Whoever was trying to intimidate her didn't understand who they were dealing with. The next day, the opposition began in earnest. A group of men in suits arrived at the center, their expressions cold and calculating. Leading them was Victor Hargrave himself, a tall, imposing man with sharp features and an air of authority that made the room feel smaller. "Mia," he said, extending a hand as if they were old friends. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Mia didn't take his hand. "What do you want, Mr. Hargrave?" His smile didn't falter. "I'm here to talk, that's all. May we step inside?" Mia hesitated but nodded, leading him into the small office she had set up in the back. Hargrave's men remained outside, their eyes scanning the room like predators sizing up prey. Hargrave took a seat, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp. "You've built something impressive here," he began, "but let's not pretend it's sustainable. You're running on donations and goodwill. That won't last." "We're doing just fine," Mia replied, her tone firm. "For now," Hargrave said, leaning forward. "But what happens when the donations dry up, when the volunteers move on? Programs like this don't survive without serious backing. And that's where I come in." Mia's stomach churned. "I'm not interested in your money, Mr. Hargrave." "You should be," Hargrave said, his voice dropping slightly. "Because without it, this program won't survive the winter." Mia held his gaze, refusing to waver. "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on yours." Hargrave's